Hello and welcome back, everyone. My name is Ragnarok Total War, but my friends sometimes call me Otto. We are playing Warhammer 2 as Lokir Melhart, aka DRIZZT DO'URDEN from the Forgotten Realms. The Dark Elves have invaded the Immortal Empires map, and we are reading along with R.A. Salvatore's Homeland from the Legend of DRIZZT Dark Elf Trilogy. We're going to kick off Chapter 2 here in a moment. I'll just give you guys a brief overview of what happened last time, which wasn't a whole lot. We moved down here, took Shizu, and then we've been inching our way towards Beijai ever since. This army scares me a little bit because they've got quite a bit of guns in there. I was thinking we could potentially come down here instead and head for the capital and just maybe ignore this army, or we could come out on the water and come around this way as well. So that way we can keep our arcs together, and I mean, it may have this guy come out here and head to Shuzi, which wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. House DeVir should be able to defend it with the arcs, maybe. But yeah, I don't know. It's a little bit of a tricky situation. Meanwhile, the Skaven over here are probably spreading their rat infestations, which is always fun in these games. But without further ado, let's get back into Chapter 2 of R.A. Salvatore's Homeland. Oh, you know what? I forgot last time to mention, aside from, going out and getting yourself a copy of the paperbacks, viewer discretion is advised because these books are fairly violent. They depict a lot of violent fight scenes and things like that, and it's somewhat graphic. It's not, over the top graphic, but there is quite a bit of violence. So if you're, a little bit sensitive to that sort of stuff, you've been forewarned. All right, let's get her going.
By the cruel seas. The heat is oppressive.
The Legend of DRIZZT, Book 1, Homeland, R.A. Salvatore, Chapter 2, The Fall of House DeVir. Dinin noted with satisfaction that any of the meandering bugbears or any other of the multitude of races composed Menzoberranzan, Drow included, now made great haste to scurry out of his way. This time the second boy of House DeVir was not alone. Nearly 60 soldiers of the house walked in tight lines behind him. Behind these, a similar order grew, though with far less enthusiasm for adventure, came 100 armed slaves of lesser goblins, orcs, and bugbears. There could be no doubt for onlookers. A Drow house was on a march to war. This was not an everyday event in Menzoberranzan, but neither was it unexpected. At least once every decade, a house decided that its position within the city hierarchy could be improved by another house's elimination. It was a risky proposition, for all of the nobles of the victim house had to be disposed of quickly and quietly. If even one survived to lay an accusation upon the perpetrator, the attacking house would be eradicated by Menzoberranzan's merciless system of justice. If the raid was executed to devious perfection, though, no recourse would be forthcoming. All of the city, even the ruling council of the top 8 matron mothers, would secretly applaud the attackers for their courage and intelligence, and no more would ever be said of the incident. Dinin took a roundabout route, not wanting to lay a direct trail between House DeVir and House DeVir. A half hour later, for the second time that night, he crept to the mushroom grove's southern end, to the cluster of stalagmites that held House DeVir. His soldiers streamed out behind him eagerly, readying weapons and taking full measure of the structure before them. The slaves were slower in their movements. Many of them looked about for some escape, for they knew in their hearts that they were doomed in this battle. They feared the wrath of the Dark Elves more than death itself, though, and would not attempt to flee. With every exit out of Menzer Branson protected by devious drill magic, where could they possibly go? Every one of them had witnessed the brutal punishments the Drow elves exacted on recaptured slaves. At Dinin's command, they jumped into their positions around the mushroom fence. Dinin reached into his large pouch and pulled out a heated sheet of metal. He flashed the object, brightened in the infrared spectrum 3 times behind him to signal the approaching brigades of Nalfine and Risen. Then, with his usual cockiness, Dinin spun it quickly into the air, caught it, and replaced it in the secrecy of his heat-shielding pouch. On cue, with the twirling signal, Dinin's Drow brigade fitted enchanted darts to their tiny handheld crossbows and took aim on the appointed targets. Every 5th mushroom was a shrieker, and every dart held a magical doomer that could silence the roar of a dragon. 2, 3, Dinin counted his hands, signaling the tempo since no words could be heard within the sphere of magical silence cast about his troops. He imagined the click as the drawn strings on his little weapon released, loosing the darts into the nearest shrieker. So it went all around with the clusters of House DeVir, the first line of alarm systematically silenced by 36 enchanted darts. Halfway across Menzer Branson, Matron Malice, her daughters, and 4 of the house's common clerics were gathered in Loth's unholy circle of 8. They ringed an idol of their wicked deity, a gemstone carving of a drow-faced spider, and called to Loth for aid in their struggles. Malice sat at the head, propped in a chair angled for birthing. Rizza and Verena flanked her, Rizza clutching her hand. The select group chanted in unison, combining their energies into a single offensive spell. A moment later, when Verena, mentally linked to Dinin, understood that the first attack group was in position, the Do'Urden circle of 8 sent the first insinuating waves of mental energy into the rival house. Matron Xenophae, her 2 daughters, and the 5 principal clerics of the common troops of House DeVir huddled together in the darkened anteroom of the 5 Stalagmite houses' main chapel. They had gathered there in solemn prayer every night since Matron Xenophae had learned that she had fallen into Loth's disfavor. Xenophae understood how vulnerable her house remained until she could find a way to appease the Spider Queen. There were 66 other houses in Menzer Branson, fully 20 of which might dare to attack House DeVir at such an obvious disadvantage. The 8 clerics were anxious now, somehow suspecting that this night would be eventful. Xenophae felt it first, a chilling blast of confusion, perceptions that caused her to stutter over her prayer of forgiveness. The other clerics of House DeVir glanced nervously at the matron's uncharacteristic slip of words, looking for confirmation. "We are under attack," Xenophae breathed to them, her head already pounding with a dull ache under the growing assault of formidable clerics of House Do'Urden. A second signal from Dinin put the slave troops into motion. Still using stealth as their ally, they quietly rushed to the mushroom fence and cut through with wide-bladed swords. The second boy of House Do'Urden watched and enjoyed as the courtyard of House DeVir was easily penetrated. "Not such a prepared guard," he whispered in silent sarcasm to the red glowing gargoyles on the high walls. The statues had seemed such an ominous guard earlier that night. Now they just watched helplessly. Dinin recognized the measure of growing anticipation in the soldiers around them. Their drow battle lust was barely contained. Every now and then came a killing flash as one of the slaves stumbled over a warding glyph. The second boy and the other drow only laughed at the spectacle. The lesser races were the expendable fodder of House Do'Urden's army. The only purpose in bringing the goblinoids to House DeVir was to trigger the deadly traps and defenses along the perimeter, to lead the way for the drow elves, the true soldiers. fence was now opened and secrecy was thrown away. House DeVir's soldiers met the invading slaves head-on within the compound. Danin barely had his hand up to begin the attack command when his 60 anxious Drow warriors jumped up and charged, their faces twisted in wicked glee and their weapons waving menacingly. They halted their approach on cue, though, remembering one final task set out to them. Every Drow, noble or commoner, possessed certain magical abilities. Bringing forth a globe of darkness, as Danin had done to the bugbears in the street earlier that night, came easily to even the lowliest of the Dark Elves. So it went now, with 60 D'URDEN soldiers blotting out the perimeter of House DeVir above the mushroom fence in ball after ball of blackness. For all their stealth and precautions, House D'URDEN knew that many eyes were watching the raid. Witnesses were not too much of a problem. They could not or would not care enough to identify the attacking house, but custom and rules demanded that certain attempts at secrecy be enacted, the etiquette of Drow warfare. In the blink of a red glowing Drow eye, House DeVir became, to the rest of the city, a dark blot on Menzo Bransan's landscape. Risen came up behind his youngest son. "Well done," he signaled, in the intricate finger language of the Drow. "Nelfane is in through the back." "An easy victory," the cocky Danin signaled back, "if Matron Jinnife and her clerics are held at bay." "Trust in Matron Malice," was Risen's response. He clapped his son's shoulder and followed his troops in through the breached mushroom fence. High above the cluster of House DeVir, Zach Nefine rested comfortably in the current arms of Briz's aerial servant, watching the drama unfold. From his vantage, Zach could see within the ring of darkness and could hear within the ring of magical silence. Danin's troops, the first Drow soldiers in, had met resistance at every door and were being beaten badly. Nelfine and his brigade, the troops of House D'URDEN, most practiced in the ways of wizardry, came through the fence at the rear of the complex. Lightning strikes and magical balls of acid thundered into the courtyard at the base of the DeVir structures, cutting down D'URDEN fodder and DeVir defenses alike. In the front courtyard, Risen and Danin commanded the finest fighters of House D'URDEN. The blessings of Loth were with this house. Zach could see when the battle was fully joined, for the strikes of the soldiers of House D'URDEN came faster than those of their enemies, and their aim proved more deadly. In minutes, the battle had been taken fully inside the 5 pillars. Zach stretched the incessant chill out of his arms and willed the aerial servant to action. Down he plummeted on his windy bed, and then he fell free the last few feet to the terrace along the top chambers of the central pillar. At once, 2 guards, one a female, rushed out to greet him. They hesitated in confusion, though trying to sort out the true form of this unremarkable gray blur. Too long. They had never heard of Zach Nefine D'URDEN. They didn't know that death was upon them. Zach's whip flashed out, catching the gashing the female's throat, while his other hand walked his sword through a series of masterful thrusts and parries that put the male off balance. Zach finished both in a single blurring movement, snapping the whip entwined female from the terrace with a twist of his wrist and spinning a kick into the male's face that likewise dropped him to the cavern floor. Zach was then inside, where another guard rose up to meet him, but fell at his feet. Zach slipped along the curving wall of the stalactite tower, his cooled body blending perfectly with the stone. Soldiers of House DeVir rushed all about him, trying to formulate some defense against the host of intruders who had already won out the lowest level of every structure and had taken 2 of the pillars completely. Zach was not concerned with them. He blocked out the clanging ring of adamantite weapons, the cries of command, the screams of death, concentrating instead on a singular sound that would lead him to his destination, a unified, frantic chant. He found an empty corridor covered with spider carvings and running into the center of the pillar. As in House D'URDEN, this corridor ended in a large set of ornate double doors, their decorations dominated by arachnid forms. "This must be the place," Zach muttered under his breath, fitting his hood to the top of his head. A giant spider rushed out of its concealment to his side. Zack dove to his belly and kicked out under the thing, spinning into a roll that plunged his sword deep into the monster's bubbleless body. Sticky fluids gushed out over the weapon master, and the spider shuddered to a quick death. Yes, Zack whispered, wiping the spider's juices from his face. This must be the place. He pulled the dead monster back into his hidden cubby and slipped in beside the thing, hoping that no one had noticed the brief struggle. By the sounds of the ringing weapons, Zack could tell the fighting had almost reached this floor. House DeVir now seemed to have its defenses in place, though, and was finally holding its ground. Now, Malice, Zack whispered, hoping that DRIZZT, tuned him in the meld, would sense his anxiety. Let us not be late. Back in the clerical anteroom of House DO'URDEN, Malice and her subordinates continued their brutal mental assault on the clerics of House DeVir. Loth heard the prayers louder than those of their counterparts, giving the clerics of House DO'URDEN stronger spells in their mental combat. Already they had easily put their enemies into a defensive posture. One of the lesser priestesses in DeVir's circle of 8 had been crushed by DRIZZT's mental insinuations, and now lay dead on the floor, barely inches from Matron Jennifer's feet. But the momentum had slowed suddenly, and the battle seemed to be swinging back to an even level. Matron Malice, struggling with the impending birth, could not hold her concentration, and without her voice, the spells of her unholy circle were weakened. At her mother's side, powerful DRIZZT clutched her mother's hand so tightly that all the blood was squeezed from it, leaving it cool, the only cool spot in the laboring female. To the eyes of the others, DRIZZT studied the contractions and the crowing cap of the coming child's white hair, and calculated the time to the moment of birth. This technique of translating the pain of birth into an offensive spell attack had never been tried before, except in legend, and DRIZZT knew that the timing would be the critical factor. She whispered into her mother's ear, coaxing out the words of a deadly incantation. Matron Malice echoed back the beginnings of the spell, sublimating her gasps and transforming her rage of agony into offensive power. Dinin duard ma brechen tol, DRIZZT implored. Dinin duard ma brechen tol. Malice growled, so determined to focus through the pain that she bit through one of her thin lips. The baby's head appeared, more fully this time, and this time to stay. DRIZZT trembled and could barely remember the incantation herself. She whispered the final rune into Matron's ear, almost fearing the consequences. Malice gathered her breath and her courage. She could feel the tingling of the spell as clearly as the pain of the birth. To her daughter, standing around the idol, staring at her in disbelief, she appeared as a red blur of heated fury, streaking sweat lines that shone as brightly as the heat of boiling water. Avec! The matron began, feeling the pressure building to a crescendo. Avec! She felt the hot tear of her skin, the sudden slippery release as the baby's head pushed through, the sudden ecstasy of birthing. Avec déjà DRIZZT! Malice screamed, pushing away all of the agony in a final explosion of magical power that knocked even the clerics of her own house from their feet. Carried on the thrust of Matron Malice's exultation, the Dormer thundered into the chapel of House DeVir, shattered the gemstone idol of Loth, sundered the double doors into heaps of twisted metal, and threw Matron Jennifer and her overmatched subordinates to the floor. Zack shook his head in disbelief as the chapel doors flew past him. Quite a kick, Malice, he chuckled and spun around the entryway into the chapel. Using his infravision, he took a quick survey and head count of the lightless room's 7 living occupants, all struggling back to their feet, their robes tattered. Again, shaking his head at the bared power of Matron Malice, Zack pulled his hood down over his face. The snap of his whip was the only explanation he offered as he smashed a tiny ceramic globe at his feet. The sphere shattered, dropping out a pellet that DRIZZT had enchanted for just such occasions, a pellet glowing with the brightness of daylight. For eyes accustomed to blackness, tuned in to heat emanations, the intrusion of such radiance came in a blinding flash of agony. The cleric's cries of pain only added Zack in his systematic trek around the room, and he smiled widely under his hood every time he felt his sword bite into drow flesh. He heard the beginnings of a spell across the way and knew that one of the DeVirs had recovered, enough from the assault to be dangerous. The weapon master did not need his eyes to aim, however, and the crack of his whip took Matron Jennifer's tongue right out of her mouth. DRIZZT placed the newborn on the back of the spider idol and lifted the ceremonial dagger to admire its cruel workmanship. Its hilt was a spider's body, sporting 8 legs, barbed so as to appear furred, but angled down to serve as blades. DRIZZT lifted the instrument above the baby's chest. "Name the child," she implored her mother. "The Spider Queen will not accept the sacrifice until the child is named." Matron Malice lolled her head, trying to fathom her daughter's meaning. The matron mother had thrown everything into the moment of the spell and the birth, and she was now barely coherent. "Name the child," DRIZZT demanded, anxious to feed her hungry goddess. "It nears its end," Dinin said to his brother, when they met in a lower hall of one of the lesser pillars of House DeVir. "Risen is winning through the top, and it is believed that Zack Nafine's dark work has been completed. 2 score of House DeVir's soldiers have already turned allegiance to us," Nalfine replied. "They see the end," laughed Dinin. "One house serves them as well as another, and in the eyes of commoners, no house is worth dying for. Our task will be finished soon." "Too quickly for anyone to take note," Nalfine said. "Now, Do'URDEN, Darman Neshazbarnan, is the 9th house of Menzoberranzan, and DeVir be damned." "Alert!" Dinin cried suddenly, eyes widening in feigned horror as he looked over his brother's shoulder. Nalfine reacted immediately, spinning to face the danger at his back, only to put the true danger at his back. For even as Nalfine realized the deception, Dinin's sword slipped into his spine. Dinin put his head to his brother's shoulder and pressed his cheek to Nalfine's, watching the red sparkle of heat leave his brother's eyes. "Too quickly for anyone to take note," Dinin teased, echoing his brother's earlier words. He dropped the lifeless form to his feet. Now, Dinin is elder boy of House Do'URDEN, and Nalfine be damned. "DRIZZT," breathed Matron Malice. "The child's name is DRIZZT." DRIZZT tightened her grip on the knife and began the ritual. "Queen of Spiders, take this babe," she began. She raised the dagger to strike. "DRIZZT Do'URDEN, and give you in payment for our glorious "Wait!" called Maya from the side of the room. Her melding with her brother Nalfine had abruptly ceased. It could only mean one thing. "Nalfine is dead," she announced. "The baby is no longer the 3rd living son." Verna glanced curiously at her sister. At the same instant that Maya had sensed Nalfine's death, Verena melded with Dinin and felt a strong emotive surge, elation. Verena brought a slender finger up to her pursed lips, wondering if Dinin had successfully pulled off the assassination. DRIZZT still held the spider-shaped knife over the babe's chest, wanting to give this one to Loth. "We promised the Spider Queen the 3rd living son," Maya warned, "and that has been given, but not in sacrifice," argued DRIZZT. Verena shrugged, at a loss. If Loth accepted Nalfine, then he has been given. To give another might evoke the Spider Queen's anger. "But to not give what we have promised would be worse still," DRIZZT insisted. "Then finish the deed," said Maya. DRIZZT clenched down tight on the dagger and began the ritual again. "Stay your hand," Matron Malice commanded, propping herself up in the chair. "Loth is content, our victory is won. Welcome, then, your brother, the newest member of House Do'URDEN." "Just a male," DRIZZT commented in obvious disgust, walking away from the idol child. "Next time we shall do better," Matron Malice chuckled, though she wondered if there would be a next time. She approached the end of her 5th century of life, and drow elves, even young ones, were not particularly fruitful lot. DRIZZT had been born to Malice at the youthful age of 100, but in the almost 4 centuries since, Malice had produced only 5 other children. Even this baby, DRIZZT, had come as a surprise, and Malice hardly expected that she would ever conceive again. Enough of such contemplations, Malice whispered to herself, exhausted. There will be ample time. She sank back into her chair and fell into fitful, though wickedly pleasant, dreams of heightening power. Zaknafine walked through the central pillar of the DeVir complex, his hood in his hand and his whip and sword comfortably replaced on his belt. Every now and then a ring of battle sounded, only to be quickly ended. House Do'URDEN had rolled through to victory. The 10th house had taken the 4th, and now all that remained was to remove evidence and witnesses. One group of lesser female clerks marched through tending to the wounded Do'URDENs and animated the corpses of those beyond their ability, so that the bodies could walk away from the crime scene. Back at the Do'URDEN compound, those corpses, not beyond repair, would be resurrected and put back to work. Zack turned away with a visible shudder as the clerics moved from room to room, the marching line of Do'URDEN zombies growing ever longer at their backs. As distasteful as Zaknafine found this troop, the one that followed was even worse. The Do'URDEN clerics led a contingent of soldiers through the structure, using detection spells to determine hiding place of surviving DeVirs. One stopped in the hallway just a few steps from Zack, her eyes turned inward as she felt emanations of her spell. She held her fingers out in front of her, tracing a slow line like some Macquarie divining rod toward the drow flesh. In there, she declared, pointing to a panel at the base of the wall. The soldiers jumped to it like a pack of ravenous wolves and tore through the secret door. Inside a hidden cubby huddled the children of House DeVir. Those were nobles, not commoners, and could not be taken alive. Zack quickened his pace to get beyond the scene, but he heard vividly the children's helpless screams as hungry Do'URDEN soldiers finished their job. Zack found himself in a run now. He rushed around a bend in the hallway, nearly bowling over Janine and Risen. Nalfine is dead, Risen declared impassively. Zack immediately turned a suspicious eye on the younger Do'URDEN's son. I killed the DeVir soldier who committed the deed, Janine assured him, not even hiding his cocky smile. Zack had been around for nearly 4 centuries, and he was certainly not ignorant to the ways of his ambitious race. The brother princes had come in defensively at the back of the lines, with a host of Do'URDEN soldiers between them and the enemy. By the time they even encountered a drow that was not of their own house, the majority of the DeVir surviving soldiers had already switched allegiance to House Do'URDEN. Zack doubted that either of the Do'URDEN brothers had even seen action against the DeVir. The description of the carnage in the prayer room has been spread throughout the ranks, Risen said to the weapon master. You performed with your usual excellence, as we have come to expect. Zack shot the patron a glare of contempt and kept on his way. Down, though the structure's main doors, and out beyond magical darkness and silence in Menzoberranzan's dark dawn. Risen was Matron Malice's present partner in a long line of partners, and no more. When Malice was finished with him, she would either relegate him back to the ranks of the common soldiery, stripping him of the name Do'URDEN and all the rights that accompanied it, or she would dispose of him. Zack owed him no respect. Zack moved out beyond the mushroom fence to the highest vantage point he could find, then fell to the ground. He watched, amazed, a few moments later, when the procession of the Do'URDEN army, patron and son, soldiers and clerics, and the slow-moving line of 24 drow zombies made its way back home. They had lost and left behind nearly all their slave fodder in the attack, but the line leaving the wreckage of House DeVir was longer than the line that had come in earlier that night. The slaves had been replaced twofold by captured DeVir slaves, and 50 or more of the DeVir common troops, showing typical drow loyalty, had willingly joined the attackers. These treacherous drow would be magically interrogated by the Do'URDEN clerics to ensure their sincerity. They would pass the test to a 1, Zack knew. Drow elves were creatures of survival, not of principle. Soldiers would be given new identities, and would be kept within the privacy of the Do'UrDen compound for a few months, until the fall of House DeVir became an old and forgotten tale. Zack did not follow immediately, rather, he cut through the rows of mushroom trees and found a secluded dell, where he plopped down on a patch of mossy carpet and raised his gaze to the eternal darkness of the cavern's ceiling and the eternal darkness of his existence. It would have been prudent for him to remain silent at that time. He was an invader to the most powerful section of this vast city. He thought of the possible witnesses to his words, the steamed dark elves who had watched the fall of House DeVir, who had wholeheartedly enjoyed the spectacle. In the face of such behavior and such carnage as the knight had seen, Zack could not contain his emotions. His lament came out as a plea to some god behind his experience. What place is this? That is my world. What dark coil has my spirit embodied? He whispered the angry disclaimer that had always been part of him. In light, I see my skin as black. In darkness, it glows white. In the heat of this rage cannot dismiss. What would I had the courage to depart this place of this life, or to stand openly against the wrongness that is the world of these my kin, to seek an existence that does not run afoul to that which I believe, and to that which I hold dear faith as truth. Zack Nafine Do'UrDen I am called, yet a drow I am not, by choice or by deed. Let them discover this being that I am. Then, let them rain their wrath on these shoulders, already burdened by hopelessness of Menzo Branzan. Ignoring the consequences, the weapon master rose to his feet and yelled, Menzo Branzan, what hell are you? A moment later, when no answer echoed back out of the quiet city, Zack flexed the remaining chill of DRIZZT's wand, from his weary muscles. He found some comfort as he patted the whip on his belt, the instrument that had taken the tongue from the mouth of a matron mother.
The mutiny!
Ooh. Well, I guess that's it for chapter 2 already. My gosh, that went by very, very quickly. Goodness gracious. Had some ups and downs here on the campaign map. We'll just go through the end turn, I believe, and then that way we can start things off fresh on we can start things off on fresh on the beginning of the turn. So we managed to get into Beche, but it did cost us Zack Nafine's fleet for the time being. But the good thing about the Black Arcs is they are immortal. We had a bit of a threat up here at House Do'UrDen, but thankfully they came back down this way. So this army, Benny Nut is here, and then the other army is out to sea somewhere, hopefully taking more attrition, but there's a good chance this may get attacked. But looks like we're gonna have a rebellion here. I mean, that's what happens when you loot and occupy, but hopefully we can wrestle the public order under control after this. Up here the public order is not too bad, and we should soon be able to re-recruit. Yeah, so next turn we'll be able to bring Zack Nafine back, and then our generals, name this after Comrade, a massive supporter of the channel, and longtime friend of the channel. And then the other general who we disbanded as Lorder, who's become a very good friend of the channel as well over the last couple of years down in Australia. So yeah, we'll name some more of the characters in the book after we start to meet some of them. But I feel like a lot of the characters that we're going to be meeting in this particular edition of the novels are not necessarily going to be friends of DRIZZT. So, yeah, anyway. Alright, yeah, let's go through the end turn and call it a day. So a little bit of a shorter chapter, a little bit of a shorter episode. But I feel like this is probably around the length that the chapters are going to be, that the episodes are going to be. Probably close to 40 minutes, like a little bit under, a little bit over, roughly. First episode was a little bit longer. But the book, not to spoil anything, has 29 chapters. So 29 parts, which is a little bit long for a Let's Play, but I feel like it should work. It should be alright. So we'll see. See how things go and keep trucking along. But I mean, 29 episodes, half an hour an episode, so that's about 15 hours of gameplay. So we'll be able to get a fair. We should be able to get at least to turn 50. So probably further would be my guess. But like I said, we'll see how she goes. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Part 3, Chapter 3, coming up next. We are our goal for the campaign will be to capture this and eliminate this faction here. So actually, let's take a quick look at this rebellion. Alright, yeah, it doesn't look too bad. These dread spears should be able to manage it. Don't quite have access to. Looks like just zombies. Yeah, we're only rank 5, so I don't have access to any regiments of renown just yet. Actually, do. Yeah, I was gonna say. All right, cool. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Episode 3 is next. Have yourselves a wonderful day. Ragnarok out.